funding of Purple House Cancer Support in Bray, Deputy Bobby Aylward, the need to address overnight ambulance resources in Kilkenny, Deputy Desi Ellis to discuss loading of car insurance policies for the elderly, and finally Deputy John Lahard to discuss access to services for homeless people in Dublin. Apologies, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Concorla. Minister, this is to ask you if you will report on any discussions you have had with American officials in relation to immigration reform, and in particular the plight of undocumented Irish citizens living in the United States. Your plans to meet with American officials in the near future to discuss this further, and if you will update the House. And I'm sure, Minister, you are very much aware of the importance of this to so many families across the country, and in particular to their loved ones in America. And it's something we need to keep the pressure on, particularly in light of increased difficulties and some of the stances that President Trump has taken recently. So I'd be interested to hear on your update in that regard
Minister,
today. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I know there are many people from your county, Deputy, that are in very vulnerable positions as a result of that, as indeed mine. The Government remains committed to achieving relief for the undocumented and to facilitate greater pathways for legal migration to the United States. Ireland's diplomatic representatives in the US are availing of all opportunities to raise the immigration issue in their contacts with US authorities, including the prospects for immigration reform and the situation of undocumented, as is the Government's special envoy to Congress on the undocumented, John Deasy TD. We do not, however, underestimate the size of the challenge at this time. This policy area has been a deeply divisive issue within the US political system for decades now, with pronounced disagreement, even within the same political parties, on the best way to deal with an issue which directly affects over 11 million people. The Government has consistently engaged with both parties in a bipartisan way to address our long-standing concerns, and this continues to be our approach. During my visit to New York for the UN General Assembly in September, I met with representatives of 4 Irish immigration centres in the region, and a representative of the US-wide Coalition for Irish Immigration Centres. And my colleague, Minister Cannon, was also at a number of those meetings and had a whole series of meetings without me also. In addition, I met with a senior State Department official and was able to further emphasise the Government's commitment to this issue when I travelled to Washington DC from the 3rd to the 5th of October, and met, along with Deputy Deasy, with senior members of the US administration and with members of Congress, including the Congressional Friends of Ireland group. In addition, our ambassador in Washington, Dan Mulhall, hosted a roundtable discussion on the 25th of October on the issue with Irish key community stakeholders, including the Coalition of Irish Immigration Centres. The Government remains wholly committed to working with the US authorities to resolve the plight of the undocumented Irish, while respecting the right of the United States to set its own immigration policies.
Deputy McConalogue has a minute.
Thank you, Laskin Corla. Thank you for your response, Minister. I know the political landscape in relation to making progress with regard to immigration reform and achieving some improvement for the undocumented Irish, and progress towards legalising their situation has become more difficult since President Trump became President. And certainly he appears to be a very, very difficult man to talk to and to make progress with. But I think it does emphasise and make it all the more important the necessity of widening our net and ensuring that we continue to engage with both Houses of Congress and parliamentarians who have a genuine interest in achieving progress for the undocumented Irish, as indeed for other undocumented nationalities as well. We have 115,000 Irish nationals living in the States legally, and it's harder to get a quantification of the exact number of undocumented Irish, but it has been estimated to be anything up to 50,000. We've all been at funerals where the sons and daughters haven't been there to bury their mothers and fathers because they're in the States without the ability to come home and haven't been able to do so for many years. So it's crucial across all parties, Minister, and I know it's something that you do know the importance of and are working on, that we re-emphasise and redouble our efforts with the Houses of Congress, with the House of Representatives and indeed with the Senate to try and build a coalition and deal with the threats that are there at the moment to actually making progress in this regard.
Minister, 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, can I say that we got a very warm reception on Capitol Hill on this issue? You know, we met Paul Ryan, met Nancy Pelosi, we met actually a whole series of congressmen and a number of other senators who are great friends of Ireland's for many, many years. We've been working with Senator Billy Lawless also, who's deeply involved in this issue. And we are all looking to try and find ways in which we can progress this issue, given the political landscape that exists at the moment, in terms of legislative opportunities that may be coming. But it's not straightforward. As you have outlined, politics in Washington is deeply divided right now, and it's difficult to get bipartisan agreement on anything, never mind immigration reform. So we will continue to look at that. John Deasy specifically is looking at this issue and nothing else in the context of his work in the US and is building contacts and friendships with people who do want to help. The question is how to get that across the line in the context of the broader debates on immigration and some of the issues that are being dealt with on Capitol Hill at the moment. But we will continue to prioritise it, and I'm sure I'll be back in Washington again in the coming months.
Deputy McConnell, 1 minute.
Thank you, Last Concordia, and thank you for your response, Minister. I do think it's important that both yourself, Minister Cannon, and I think Mr. Deasy, Deputy Deasy, and that role is a useful one. It's important that also you would look at other options, working with the Committee on Foreign Affairs here in the Oireachtas as well, to try and ensure that at parliamentarian to parliamentarian there is engagement with politicians in the US, and maybe if there's other ways that could be done, because I think that is a very useful way of trying to ensure that it is kept in the political agenda and that there's a wider coalition built to try and get progress on this back on track. It's obviously not going to happen from President Trump, but he may not always hold the level of sway he does at the moment, and it's important that we do engage and try and ensure that there's a broad coalition. I know there's work going on that. It's important, I think, that certainly is broadened. I know some of the recent statements in relation to halving the amount of green cards that are issued every year from President Trump. Also, there's been talk of him punishing what he's termed sanctuary cities, cities that have a very good relationship with undocumented Irish and other undocumented by withholding public grants. Those are very, very concerning. What we can do, we don't have power over it, but all we can do is work on a united basis, a united front, which I know will be your approach. And I would just encourage you to look at other options to try and redouble and continue those efforts, which I know has been made, because it is difficult, but we owe it to the undocumented Irish and their families here in our country to do everything we can to try and regularise their situation.
1 minute.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're probably all on the same page here. There are Irish people living in the US at the moment who are, literally living in the shadows, and they are a lot more concerned and feel a lot more vulnerable and exposed than maybe they have in the past. And so this is a big issue, and we are trying to think imaginatively as to how we can progress it with the current administration. But that is not straightforward, but we wouldn't have asked John Deasy to do the job he's doing at the moment if we didn't think he can make some progress. So I'm happy to talk to people about how we're doing and what we're doing, but I wouldn't like to raise expectations here. This is not straightforward and it's not easy, given the current political environment in Washington. But it is something that is, top of the priority list for us in the context of EU-US or Ireland-US relationships, and we'll continue to try and progress it.
We move on now to the next question, and it's from Deputy Sean Crowe.
Minister, I tabled this question after the Armed Forces Statute of Limitations Bill was moved to first stage in the House